All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies course, I've been going through and creating a series of lectures based on the Mozilla Developer Network Learn Web Development series. I am currently in the CSS, and I'm in the building blocks of CSS, talking about cascade and inheritance. I finished about the first half of this module, or this lesson, I should say, in the last tape, and I want to finish now. So what they're saying here is if we run this, I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to put this in here into my document. So I've got this unordered list and these, these 3 list items. So 4 list items. Okay, let's see. Like I said, I really like to lay this stuff out like this so I can see exactly what I'm talking about. If you disagree, then you disagree, and then don't do it that way. All right, that just took a minute or so to do that. I'm going to get rid of all the CSS that's currently in here and replace it with the CSS that we had in the lesson here, which is here. All right. Now, let's break this down. For a second, let's not even worry about these. In fact, let's take these and comment all of them out. And what I believe, at least, what should happen then after that is the text on all of these will be just, everything is going to be green. Okay, let's see if indeed I'm correct. And it is. Now, don't worry about the links. I'm talking about the text. And you can see that the text on everything is indeed green. Okay, well, that's fine. That's the first one. Then, so that's the default one that's right here. And then we've got the my class 1. So let's uncomment that one, just that one. And it says that should inherit from the parent. Well, the only thing for that to inherit for the A tag, the only thing for that to inherit is the color from up above. So in other words, everything in there should be green, including the hyperlink. So let's see if indeed that's the case. And you can see that it is. All right. Okay, next one. My class 2. Now, if you remember, when we went back and took a look at this, so my class 2 is using the initial. All right, so with the initial, according to what we saw earlier, sets the property to the initial value of that property. The initial value of that property. Okay, so let's take a look with that in there and see what that looks like. So save. And it, as you can see, it becomes black. And then finally, the last one, when we do the unset, again, looking back on here, it says for unset, it resets it to its natural value, meaning that if the property is naturally inherited, it acts like inherit, otherwise it acts like an initial. Well, what does that mean? That means that link should either be green if it acted like inherit, or it should be black if it acted like initial. So let's see which one of those works. And it's green. Okay, hopefully that made a little bit of sense, but let's just keep going. So the CSS shorthand property all can be used to apply one of these inheritance values to almost everything at one time. As it says, it's a convenient way to undo changes made to styles so they get back to a known starting point. In the example below, there are two block quotes. The first has styling applied to the block quote element itself, and the second has a class applied to the block quote, which sets the value of all to unset. So the first one, as you can see, has got some padding or margin or something in there. It's got a border around it. All right. And it's got a border with a red background. Okay. And the second one is unset. So the second one it's as though there is nothing added to it. Okay. Now block quotes will have things by default, whatever the browser has. But this first one right here that says the block quote is styled, as mentioned, it's going to grab all this stuff. But the second one here that says the block quote is not styled, all right, it's going to grab this, which means it's going to unset it, which is though it has no styling whatsoever. So let's do this. I'm not even going to bring in any CSS. I'm just going to bring in the HTML. And I'm going to take all of the CSS that's currently in here and remove it. Then I'm going to take everything that's in the body and remove it, or try to. All right, and then paste this in. So we now have the two block quotes in there, but neither block quote has any styling at all affixed to it. So when I come in here, looks like that. The block quote is styled, the block quote is not styled, which is probably what you think would happen because there's no styling that's been added to it at all. All right. So when we come in and start to add some styling, when we bring in this first one, now again, okay, watch what happens when we just bring in the first one. All right, it says in here that the background color should be red and it should have a green border on it. Let's see what happens. You'll notice that they both look the same, whether it's styled or unstyled. Why? Because they're both block quotes. And what we said right here, what we had said was, hey, block quotes, they're both block quotes. So in other words, they should both be styled like this. This class that equals fix this, since there's nothing there for that, it basically just acts as though it's not even there, for lack of better words. All right. So with that said, let's put in the other CSS that we had there. Which was this. And that says take everything and unset it. So in other words, it makes it look like it, like it did originally, or at least that's what it should be doing. So let's see if indeed that's what it does. All right. So it unset it, or took everything that was in there, it took it out. Okay. All right. Understanding the cascade. It says we now understand why a paragraph nested deep in the structure of your HTML is the same color as the CSS applied to the body. All right, we have an understanding of how to change CSS applied to something at any point in the document. We will now take a proper look at how Cascade defines which CSS style rules apply when more than one thing could style an element. And as it says right here, there's three things we have to consider: source order, specificity, and importance. We've already seen how source order matters to the cascade. If you've got two different rules on the same thing with the same weight, the one that shows last wins. It says you can think of this as rules as the one nearer the element overwrites the earlier one. Fine. Specificity. Once you understand the fact that the source order matters, you'll run into something at one point or another, as it says, where you know that a rule comes later in the style sheet, but an earlier one is applied because it has a higher specificity. We saw that before, where we had the class for an I think it was for an H1, and then we had an H1 selector, and the one that had the class is the one that applied because it's more specific. Something to note here, the author says, is that although we are thinking about selectors and the rules that are applied, it isn't the entire rule which is overwritten, it's only the properties. This behavior helps to avoid repetition in your CSS. A common practice is to define generic styles for the basic elements, then create more specific classes for the ones that are different. They mention here, it says, as an example, we have defined generic styles for level 2 headings, and then created some classes which only change some of the properties and values. All right. So we've said all H2s are going to be 2M, so this one and this one. They will all have a color of black, which is this one and this one. I know this isn't black, but originally it is. All right. Then in here, we've got an H2 heading with no class, so that just gets the defaults. In other words, 2M, black, Georgia font. Then we've got another one that's got a class of small. Well, small is only 1M, so it's half, basically. Okay, right there. And then finally, we've got the one with bright, which says it should be purple. Now, the only thing that's different in bright is purple. So it still inherits from here, from the H2, it inherits the font size and inherits the font family. But the color, which was originally black, is overridden with Rebecca Purple. So these two look exactly the same, except here we've overwritten the font color. All right, I'd like to finish this one up here, so let's see if we can. So let's now have a look at how the browser will calculate specificity. All right, the amount of specificity a selector has is measured by 4 different values. You can think of them as having a thousands component, a hundreds component, a tens component, and a ones component. The thousands, as it says, score 1 if the declaration is inside of a style attribute. Okay. Hundreds, score 1 if it's for each ID that's contained inside the overall selector. Tens, 1 for each class selector, and ones for each element selector. So what they're saying in here, basically, they give you 4 examples. You'll notice this one is the smallest because it is just the element itself. All right. Here we've got, again, basically just the element itself. Here we've got the element, okay, plus we've got one of the tens for each class selector or attribute selector, which is what we have in here. All right, and it goes no selector with a rule inside of the style attribute. Okay, it says let's look at one more example. So we've got 2 buttons. You can see what happens to the one button, or I guess the button that says 2 on it. The one that says 1 on it does nothing, but the one that says 2 on it, when you go over it, you can see how it different changes. It says, first of all, we are only interested in the first 7 rules in this example. Okay, so they go through the thing that's in here. The thing that you have to realize is, what do we have in here? We've got, all right, we've got these 2 things, one that says 1, one that says 2, right? Okay. Classes nav, all of the stuff that's in here is the same. All right, but here they've got nth child 2, which means what we're interested in here is the second one, and with that second one, we're telling it that when we're hovering over the A tag, which is here, when we hover over it, it should have a 10 pixel double black border. Okay, everything else is basically identical between the 2. All right, the last thing that's in here, yeah, we got time, is the important rule. The first thing I'll tell you about this, the most important thing I will tell you about this, is don't overuse it. It says there's a special piece of CSS that you can use to overrule almost anything we've learned so far. But you should be very careful when using it. So what you're doing here is you're basically overriding what should happen with what you want to have happen, for lack of better words. All right. So when you look at this, what do we have? Well, we've got winning here, background color red, better. And notice with better, it's got this. All right. So both of them have a class of better. And the second one has both a class of better and an ID of winning. Okay. With better, the background color is gray. There is no border. That's what we've gone and put the important on. And if you notice when you take a look on that, neither one of them have a border. All right. So what that has done by putting that important right there is, even though typically an ID will override a class, that border that's in here is not shown. And that border is not shown because we've said to overwrite it by putting in no border, because we've used the important tag. And that's what they're explaining in here. I'll let you take a look at it yourselves. But it says the only way to override this important declaration would be to include another important declaration. This is where this really runs into some trouble, because what ends up happening is you've got so many important tags in that it's like, why do we even have any of these in here? So the author even says, we strongly recommend that you never use it unless you absolutely have to. And what does that mean? Well, you know, as always, it's your site, so you might decide you do have to for whatever reason. Finally, it's useful to note that the importance of a declaration depends on what style sheet it is specified in. It is possible for users to set custom style sheets to override developer styles. Okay, so finally, they're showing you the order in here. All right, these are the default browser styles. They're the one at the lowest or end of the hierarchy. Custom styles set by users. Customs in the author style sheet. Important in the authors, important in the users. There's actually more to it than this, but the idea is, look at it this way, that for lack of better words, let's just say that everything you do, you either have CSS for elements, or you have classes, or you have IDs. IDs trump classes, classes trump elements. And if you remember that, you're well on your way to understanding this. All right. It says, if you understood most of this, then well done. No, notice they even say most of this. Part of it is knowing, again, when to come back and take a look at something and, basically to have a basic understanding of it. All right. So if you didn't fully understand these concepts, don't worry. It's definitely the most complicated thing we've covered so far in the course, and something that even professional web developers have problems with, at least on occasion. All right. So when we come back in just a couple minutes, we have now finished the cascade and inheritance. So we're going to jump into CSS selectors, and that'll be the next thing for us to cover.